South Africa, knowing that South Africa is one of about 6 African countries who currently have plans that outline a national vision and goals to be achieved by 2030. Indications are that business can play a constructive role and add value to realizing the goals outlined in South Africa's National Development Plan. Joining me now to explain how business can actively participate in the implementation of the National Development Plan is TREVOR DAVIES. He is, of course, the Global Director for International Development Assistance Services at advisory firm KPMG. TREVOR, thank you so much for joining us. So today you had over 100 stakeholders coming together discussing the implementation of South Africa's National Development Plan. Was the overriding sentiment that this plan is indeed realistic and is an adequate response to South Africa's socio-economic challenges?
Yes, I think, and thank you for inviting me on the show this evening. Yes, I think so. I think KPMG has been involved in this area now since February last year when the first draft of the plan came out. And I think we've engaged with the business community at every step, and we've acted really as a sort of a link between the business community and government, producing a paper which we sent to government last year. I think today's workshop, the general reaction I think from the people involved was that it's a very good plan, as you said. Obviously, you're never going to get 100% agreement on anything in life, particularly when you're in a democracy where people are able to express views. But it's a good plan. I mean, it speaks to poverty alleviation and reducing sort of inequalities between different citizens and different groups of citizens, and that has to be a good thing. Obviously, there can always be debate about how you do it, but the key issue is to get on with implementation. I think that was the overriding message coming from the private sector and the academics at the session today.
Can we then ring-fence some of the tensions and the non-support that we're getting from significant members like the Tripartite Alliance as just teething problems, or are these significant stumbling blocks in the implementation phase?
I think it's always difficult when you're trying to do something like this. When you set out a vision, and 2030 is actually not that far away, it's 17 years, it really isn't that long. Particularly when you're talking about the scale of change that you're looking for in South Africa. You know, you're talking about moving private sector investment up from 10% of GDP to 20% of GDP. You're looking at unemployment coming down from 39% down to 6%. I mean, those are huge changes, and they require very large-scale infrastructure investment. They need the private sector to engage, and they need that infrastructure to be implemented in a fairly short order. I mean, if you look at, say, a power station, it would typically take about 8 years to build a power station and get it online. So if you start the planning for that today, if my maths are right, you're looking at something coming online in 2021, 2022. Now, that doesn't give a lot of time to actually contribute to the NDP. So I think, you know, implementation is the key. I think moving forward swiftly. Now, with this, you could debate it probably for another 5 years, and you still wouldn't get 100% agreement. The issue is, do you wait till you've got everybody on board, and would that ever happen?
Or do you just go ahead?
Or do you just go ahead? Yeah.
You've had quite a number of experiences with national plans of this nature. Is there an international best practice or a model that you think best reflects the South African context and that the South African government stands to learn from?
I think there's two answers really to that. I mean, one is the slightly glib one. It's whatever works, and that may sound sort of rather trite, but it's not an academic exercise. You're dealing with a lot of dynamics. You're dealing with markets, you're dealing with business, you're dealing with politicians, and you're dealing with a whole variety of different citizens with different vested interests in all sorts of different countries, coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and histories. And therefore, whatever you do in a particular country has to take into account all of those factors. So there's not a thing you could just take off the shelf and say, if you do that, it will work. However, there are certain tools that you can use that will help you along the process. I mean, one of them obviously is the active engagement of leadership in the process. Now, in any political processes, the leaders have so many demands on their time, not least from their electorate and their constituency, but also from the international community, from dealing with the markets and from dealing with the, the politics and the issues of the day, just business as usual in government. So when you bring about a major change like this, you need to look at the resources you need to implement it. One of the ways that that's been done in many countries is to actually set up a special unit reporting directly to the President or Prime Minister of the country, charged with the responsibility for doing really the day-to-day grunt work. So that
almost like a secretariat.
Very similar to a secretariat. Yeah, indeed, it's called a secretariat in some countries. In the UK, it's called the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit. In India, in Andhra Pradesh, where I worked on the plan, it was similarly, it was a secretariat. So there's a lot of them. You can call them different things, and again, it depends on the culture. But the key thing is what it does. It actually helps to set up a process of actually going through the plan in detail, breaking it down into measurable chunks, usually 5-year periods, because looking out 17 years is a long time and it's quite difficult to do. Much easier if you can break it down into bite-sized chunks that people can digest, which you can then link to your medium-term economic framework, which I've heard the government is doing here already. And then you can actually set clear, measurable targets for each element of the plan, and you can monitor those. And the sort of secretariat or PMU or whatever you want to call it, its role would be very much to work with individual line ministries to help them to actually go through that process using a standard methodology. Because with the best one in the world, if you look at South Africa at the moment, you've got, I think it's something like 1,100 different public sector bodies which actually have budgets. That's from national to provincial to local to district level, and then into the parastatals as well. So over 1,100 budgets that need to be coordinated and pulled together in a way that actually contribute to the NDP and contribute by going in the same direction. And that's a huge task.
It's a huge task, and I'm also going to quickly throw a two-pronged question at you. The first is, in the South African context, is business and government finding each other? And having had an opportunity to really dig deep into the plan, have you found that there is significant integration of the plan into the relevant departmental units?
Okay, that's a question I would find difficult to answer personally myself. I think some of my colleagues in KPMG who've been very closely involved in the plan and in those consultations would be better placed to answer that. From my perspective, from what I've seen in the very short time that I've been in the country, i.e. since Sunday evening, and from the discussions I've had, I would say yes, there's a lot going on, but obviously yes, there's more to do. I think the business leaders that we were talking to today felt they'd been engaged in the early stage of the plan, but now felt they wanted to see implementation going forward as soon as possible and as clearly as possible, with the role of the business community clearly articulated, with clear targets, clear measurements, and a very clear understanding of what all levels of government are actually going to contribute to the process.